Hi everyone. My name is Naveen Vivek. I have been a part of BCG since September of 2020, so it's been a couple months. Um, I am currently a senior double majoring in electrical engineering and math. Last semester, I was the project manager for the Airmark project. Before that, I was on the Frugal Pay team, and right now I am along with Arjit Jagan. I'm helping out, sort of coordinate all the projects. So with that, we're going to get started with today's presentation. It's on professional communication. And so for starters, what exactly is professional communication? So as it says in the name, it's professional and communication. So it's basically ensuring that all of your communication, whether it's with your coworkers, whether it's with people above you in the chain of command, it's all professional and comprehensible by everyone along that within that discussion. And so why is it important? So a lot of people make their first impressions in their workplace through professional communication. A lot of people can lose their reputation if their communication is either not professional or not effective. And as well as corporate meetings and interviews, it's very helpful to sort of have a be able to communicate very well. And so what is the fundamental differences between these two images? And so anyone can unmute their mic and sort of spitball what exactly differences they see between these two images. And just for future reference, I'm going to be referring to professional communication as PC, and all of my images are related to The Simpsons. So anyone can unmute and say what they think is the fundamental difference between these two images and how they pertain to professional communication.
On an overall broad level, it's like formal versus informal. You can see that kind of in what they're wearing, as well as just their like attitudes.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you, Aiden. And so as you can see, as mentioned before, the outfits are very different in the two pictures. The setting is different, as well as you can see a little bit how exactly, their posture, as well as how exactly they're looking at one another is also very different in both these images. And so this one is a little bit more on the professional side. However, communication is important in both, which is what I want to emphasize, is that regardless of the situation, proper communication is important. And so I've split the presentation into two main parts. One is online communication and one is in-person communication. And online communication is split into four parts. So the first is texting, which is the image on the top left. The image on the bottom left is emailing. The image on the top right is being on a voice call with someone, so just a regular phone call. And the last one is video calling, which a lot of us have frequently encountered. And so the reason online communication is so important is because in a virtual world, a lot of your communication, whether that's an internship, whether that's class, a lot of it is now virtual. And so it's important to make sure that you're getting your message across regardless of whether or not you're able to make an impact in person. And so right now, essentially what I've split it is into a do's and don'ts list of all of this. And I'll be sharing this presentation with all of you after, so you don't need to note down exactly all the do's and don'ts. And so the first one is messaging. So the reason I think messaging is really important is that because, especially with all of us through Slack, we can't necessarily hop on a meeting at any point in time. So it's kind of, messaging is very important because it's asynchronous and it's convenient for a lot of people because you can respond from your phone. However, joining a Zoom meeting from a phone might be a little harder, especially with your camera on, because it doesn't angle very well. And so a couple do's for messaging is, responding in a timely fashion. And this is one thing that I can't emphasize enough. The first time you're messaging someone, whether that be through Slack, Teams, or whatever, it's important to introduce yourself saying, hello, my name is, and I usually prefer it when people introduce themselves with a full name because there could be multiple people in a particular Slack channel. And especially if two people don't have profile pictures and they happen to share the same name, I won't exactly know who is messaging me for that particular topic unless I pick it up through context. And so a typical example is, hello, my name is Naveen Navek. I'm currently a senior and I'm on project XYZ, and I'm looking to learn a little bit more about this. And so, there's the starting of that sentence, which is communication of your name and who you are. And then there's the second half, which is what you do and why you're communicating to them in the first place. And so using proper punctuation and spelling, that's definitely something, especially since we're so used to using abbreviations when it comes to messaging our friends. You have to make sure that professional communication is different from casual communication. So, instead of saying WBU to a friend, I have to emphasize, what about you, or what are you doing, if I want to make conversation. And a lot of this can generalize to LinkedIn, because I know a lot of, at least people I've heard of, have gotten interviews through LinkedIn. So it's really important to maintain that professional relationship with a recruiter who is messaging you via LinkedIn, or even if it's someone who's just asking you a question about, what classes to take, or, what to do in grad school and stuff like that. So it's really important to make sure you have that professional level established, especially through messaging. And then whenever you're unavailable, let someone know, especially if it's like something where, there's a deadline approaching in the next couple of days. And, if you need a couple hours, you need to go run an errand for someone, or if you need to take some time off, feel free to let your project manager or your coworker know, because it's important so that, they're not constantly bugging you because, you're not at your computer. So that's very important. And especially through messaging, be sure to include details. So if you're running into a problem, make sure to include details of why you're running it. For example, I'm part of a research team and we have a dedicated channel for software bugs. And so it's when you say, hey, I'm running into a problem with Python, that gives me no information. And so I need to ask, okay, what library are you using? What code are you trying to run? What's your error look like? And so including all that details when you're first communicating could be really, really helpful. And so a couple don'ts is when you're first talking to someone, especially if it's professional, don't use terms like yo or dude, especially like obviously as time progresses, you will develop more of a personal and a casual relationship with that person. However, especially towards the start, it's better not to jump into, casual salutations like yo or dude or bro and stuff like that. And so be sure not to use foul or explicit language. A lot of people take this very, very seriously because when you're first communicating, you don't want to give across the vibe that, you don't care about what type of language they're using within a workplace, because there are certain terms that are extremely inappropriate regardless of the circumstances. And so this is one thing that I strongly advise everyone to do is don't press send too early. Every time you read a message, once you're done typing it, take a minute, don't put your phone on the ground or put it on a table and read through the message carefully. Check for typos, check for appropriate punctuation, check for, all the do's on this side. And then after that, hit send, because a number of times I've made a small typo, and this can be very, very difficult when you're talking to someone, when you're messaging someone and you misspell their name, because that is a clear indication that you don't care about their time, or you don't care about, you don't take the effort in order to learn their name. And that could be very, very, that could lead to a really bad first impression. And one thing in a professional setting is if you're going to be humorous, be sure that it's very clear as to what the joke is implying, because a lot of times, especially when you send jokes, they can be taken offensively or they can be read in a bad tone. For example, sarcasm is very hard to get across through text messaging. And so that's definitely one thing that I try to avoid, especially when I'm messaging. And if I have developed a casual relationship, that I make sure to use emojis that clearly indicate that I'm being humorous and I'm not, trying to offend anyone in a particular situation. And definitely don't be culturally inappropriate. That's self-explanatory. Don't make fun of someone based off of their culture or any other factor for that matter, whether that be gender, sexual orientation, race, anything. And so the second one is emailing. This is also something that all of us encounter very, very frequently. I don't know how many people have done this already, but be sure to include an email signature out. If you Google Outlook email signature, there's a way that you can do it. It's easy to do via the app, but it's also simple to do on the website. So, what I have is Naveen Vivek. I have electrical engineering and mathematics, Purdue University class of 2022. And then below that, I have my email and my phone number. That way, that's what I use for my Purdue email, and for my internship email, I have, intern, whatever my department is and whatever company I'm working for, as well as my email so they can contact me. So that's definitely a must do. Have automatic replies when you're out of office. So this is much more for right now, since we're all in university, we're all university students. It's a little, there's not really an out of office term, because, even if you get emails on the weekend, chances are you respond pretty quickly. But when you're in the workplace, it's important, if you're going on vacation for a week, to have an automatic out of office message. So essentially it's like, hey, I will be out of office from XY date to XY date. If you have any questions, contact XYZ for this, ABC for this, and PQR for this. And so you can give a list of names. That's what my manager did. She's currently on vacation. And so this is one piece of advice that's very similar to the previous message, where type the email you want to send first and then type in the recipient, because the number of times I have partially typed an email and then accidentally hit enter and it's gone through to another person is uncountable. So I try really hard not to do that. And so I always type out the entire message and then I copy paste the recipient. So that way there's no way that I can send it, because Outlook will simply say, hey, you don't have a recipient, so you can't send this message. And so this is just inform when you're unavailable. This is similar to messaging, where it's important to make sure that you don't have that people aren't messaging you, people aren't emailing you when you're not going to be able to respond, whether that be for a couple hours. And if it's for a couple days, be sure to have that out of office automatic response. And so the subject, when you're first time communicating with someone, be sure to have the topic as well as your name. However, after that, if it's already implied, like if you're applying to a chain of emails, don't, put your name in every time because they already know who they're talking to. And so don't have an automated just I am out of office. Like that doesn't really give a lot of information. I've seen this before. OOO stands for out of office. And so be sure to redirect, as I mentioned before, contact this person for this and that person for that. And don't sign off with love or from, just because that's not the most professional thing. And especially if it's like someone who you're contacting to the first time, I don't know if they want to see love Naveen Vivek at the end of their email. That would be kind of odd. And this might be just a me thing, but don't attach really large files, just because if you want to be able to communicate with someone, you should probably be able to either, for example, I use Microsoft Teams and Outlook, and whenever I have to attach a large file, I just message them on Teams with that particular file. And that's just because a lot of people are not, unless it's a very, very important file, try to make sure that you're attaching it or you're communicating it through a meeting, because if you don't want to send an entire 50 page slide deck without explaining it, because when they open that file, they're going to be like, what is this? So it's better to explain it. And after the meeting, of course, it's perfectly fine to send the slides. It's just, it needs a little bit of context, especially large files. So when you're writing an email, be sure to split it into paragraphs based off of context. Don't write one entire paragraph containing all the list of problems over the course of a week. Maybe split it into, okay, project 1, project 2, project 3, and stuff like that. And so don't miss important details unless they're confidential. Of course, confidential stuff, they might recommend communicating via phone call or a Teams voice call or something like that. But I know that a lot of companies do have a policy with Outlook where Outlook has some sort of security set up. So I think it's okay to send most details, but they'll explicitly mention that whichever company you're going to be working with. So voice calling, introduce yourself at the start of a voice call, especially if it's an interview. You want to make sure that they know who they're talking to and they're talking to the right person. Confirming verbally, this is a really important one, because I know a lot of times you can't, because in class, whenever a professor says, does everyone understand? We're so used to nodding because we don't want to scream, yes, professor, in front of a lecture hall of 400 people. However, when you're on a phone call, if you nod, they can't see you. So it's really important to make sure that you're confirming things verbally, like whether that be a mm-hmm, or that be a yes or a yeah or anything. Be polite and respectful, self-explanatory. Use headphones or earphones. This is just because a lot of times I've been on calls and I've had trouble hearing other people, or I've had trouble where there's an echo on the other person's ends. And both of those problems can be resolved by using earphones or headphones. Then the next one is don't interrupt another person talking. I know it can be a little difficult when you can't tell who's talking because you can't see their lips moving because it's a voice call, but try your best to make sure that you're not interrupting another person talking. And if you are, just say apologies and then say if you have something important to say in the moment. Don't hang up without informing anyone. I've definitely seen people when I've been on a Teams call or something and they've just dropped without messaging anything in the chat. And so that can be a little difficult because you don't really know where they've gone, whether they've lost the internet or something like that. Don't speak too quietly, more importantly than too loudly. I think too quietly is a problem that I've run into a lot more, just because it's very, very difficult to judge how you're talking, because when you're talking in real life, you can perfectly hear what you're saying, whereas you don't know how the receiving end is going to pick up your message. And so don't go on mute throughout the call. Be sure to actively engage within a conversation and be sure to contribute, unless it's a meeting in which you're sort of shadowing, in which case that's perfectly fine. And last but not least about online communication, video calling. Keep your camera on if other people have it on. That's just respectful. And it's also kind of nice to know that, if you're willing to turn on your camera, maybe others are willing to too. And that way you can get sort of a little bit more of an in-person feel. And so it's kind of nice. And, you can see other people smile and see other people talk and stuff like that. Mute yourself when you're not talking. This is just a little, sometimes it can cause a problem, especially when you're in a loud area. And, you're just, I very often get distracted when I hear noise coming from other people's mics, even if it's like slight background noise. And don't check your phone unless you're required to. For example, if you're waiting for a really important phone call, then that's fine. However, don't check it to open Snapchat or Instagram, especially when you're on a voice call for a professional reason. And don't get distracted or look anywhere else. I know some people have this habit of looking outside the window when they're talking. And I understand that it is somewhat inevitable, but be sure that you're constantly reminding yourself, okay, there are people in front of me, and okay, I need to look straight towards the camera, because it gives people much more of a conversational sense. These were just placeholder images because I didn't have anything else for video calling. All right, I'm gonna take a gap there. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or feel free to drop them in the chat. And if you want me to go back to any slides, just let me know. And again, I'll share this deck after the presentation, so you don't need to take super detailed notes.
For phone calling, when you're confirming, like saying yes, is there like a preference on whether to say like yeah or uh-huh or mm-hmm or
I usually do just because that's the most subtle one, and that's the one that doesn't throw them off the most, I think. But that might just be me. I think it's sort of a preference. But I can see why saying yes consecutively can somewhat get on the nerves of someone else, especially if you're saying it after every single sentence. It can get a little frustrating, but is a lot more subtle. But then again, sometimes people don't hear because it's not like an actual word. It's just tones. So I don't
Okay.
know. It definitely depends on the situation. But good question.
Got it.
Anything else? Okay, there's a chat. Very good question. Is there such a thing as responding too fast to emails? It really depends on who it is. So it's like, you know how when you're texting someone and you're not super close to them, you tend to wait a couple minutes before responding because you don't want to be seen as that guy who responds instantly and is always on Instagram. It's a similar thing with emails. I try to make sure that I read through my email multiple times before sending it out, especially if it's something important, like, for example, accepting a job offer or, confirming an interview time, stuff like that. You need to be really careful of, make sure of time zones, make sure you're actually being professional, make sure you're clearly stating whether or not you are accepting the job offer. That's very important. And so overall, I'd say, unless it requires extreme urgency, maybe hold off for about an hour, and after that I don't think anything's considered too fast. And make sure to actually, like, impulsively sending emails is definitely a thing, so especially when you're frustrated or when you're super excited, be sure to actively write and then stop writing, read it through, and then hit send. But yeah, there's no like, responding too fast is definitely a thing, but it's not as much of a thing as in the case of text messaging. But yeah, really good question. All right, if there are no other questions, I'm going to start with the in-person communication section, where I've split it into two parts again. This is casual conversation, actually not casual conversation, this is just conversation, and this is presentation. And so IC stands for in-person conversation. So when you're making conversation, one thing that I have seen a lot of people do is make eye contact. And when you're making eye contact, it definitely does make a positive impact on the other person who's on the other end of your conversation, because it makes sure that you don't look super distracted. You actually care what they're listening to. And when you look at someone, chances are you're paying attention to what they're saying, which gives them more of a chance to pay attention to what you're saying. So it's very productive and a very filling conversation. And so when you're meeting someone the first time, offer a shake hand when you're first meeting them. This might just be me, I don't really know, but whenever I first meet someone, I always have a tendency to shake their hand, just because I feel like it's a nice way to sort of break the ice a little bit instead of waving hi. And I also don't know how to wave. I don't know how to wave professionally. I don't know if anyone knows how to wave professionally. If you do, please teach me, because I've done this and that does not work very well. Like I can't salute people in an office. It's weird. And the third one is definitely read the room when you're having a conversation. Like, for example, if there's complete silence in memory of someone, you don't want to strike a conversation with the person next to you. You just want everyone to be quiet. And if there's a meeting where, though someone else is talking, you don't want to casually converse to the person next to you as if there's no one presenting. So definitely read the room prior to beginning a conversation. Not to say that you shouldn't start conversation, but definitely know what context you should and shouldn't start conversation. So this also might just be a me thing, but whenever I first meet someone, I don't know if, like, I wouldn't want to be casually patted on the back or just physical contact in general besides a shake hand, because I know in general some people do feel very uncomfortable with physical contact regardless of what circumstance or form it is. So it's probably better to be on the safe side, and besides the shake hand, probably not, especially when you're first meeting them, because you don't want to make a bad impression. And then don't constantly check your phone or device. This sort of leads to the eye contact thing where, the more you check your device, the less likely you are to make eye contact. So it's a little difficult. And this is also another thing. Don't leave a conversation midway. Be sure to conclude the conversation and be like, hey, hey, I have to run. if you'd like to talk, feel free to email me and stuff like that. So sort of have a concluding sentence, just be like, okay, how are you? And then just completely leave the conversation. No one likes being completely left without a response. Okay, so presentations, just professionally. That really depends on sort of what the workspace is. I know for predominantly, like business meetings, probably suit. Whereas if it's somewhere more of like a casual, like update, like a Scrum meeting for software developers, in that case, you can probably just wear whatever. And be sure to practice your presentation prior to giving it multiple times. Make sure to make eye contact with your audience, include a summary slide, and have a Q&A session after the presentation. These are just sort of standard presentation tips that I think will definitely help. And definitely don't include inappropriate jokes or images. A lot of the time that can be misinterpreted by someone. And you never know how exactly people are going to take your joke or your image. And so try not to use filler words like and I know it's inevitable, but the more you practice a presentation, the less likely you are to use filler words because you know you've timed it perfectly and you can't afford to sort of mistime anything. And then don't have false or misleading information. This is extremely important, especially in the field of consulting where you're going to have to generate visuals for people to understand. And if you generate a visual, they could potentially lead to someone misunderstanding your information that could lead to a problem, especially with a big client. And don't cross the time limit provided. This is just sort of a standard, people have meetings after your meeting time. So it's better, if your meeting's from 2 to 3, make sure you don't go to 3:10 or 3:15. If you go to like 3:02 or something like that, that's okay. But make sure that you're at least actively putting effort to meet that time limit. And don't forget your references or citations. A lot of times people do have slides that have a lot of useful information, but then when they ask where you got them from, they're like, oh yeah, I forgot. And that's, if you want to go back and look at that resource, you won't be able to because the presenter doesn't have access to that resource either. So now we're going to have a little activity where we're going to go through a sample conversation and sort of every single, so all the red ones are obviously the ones that are wrong. And if anyone can unmute their mic and say what exactly is wrong with that particular one, that'd be great. So I'm going to read out the situation. Thomas is representing the Boilermaker Consulting. That's a typo. Okay, Thomas is representing the Boilermaker Consulting Group, and this is an in-person presentation to Jane, the CEO of a potential client. It's also a typo. And Jane has just walked in. And so T is Thomas and J is Jane. And so Thomas begins the conversation by saying, yo, what's up? That's
Thomas is a little too casual.
Yep, Thomas is a little too casual, right on. Thank you, Joseph. And so the first thing is obviously, and so what would be a more appropriate way to address a client?
Like, hello, nice to meet you. My name is.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, he didn't introduce himself. That's
exactly. Whoops, I went to the next slide. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's perfect. So that led us into our next one, which is hello, who are you? And so Thomas replies with Tommy and you. And so does anyone care to say what's wrong with this one?
He should likely give his full name.
Yes, that is correct. Even if he gives the word Tommy, it's probably important to give his full last name, right? Because, there could be like 50 Tommies within BCG and she'd have no idea who she was talking to. And so she replies, and one other thing is that as Joseph mentioned before, there was no formal introduction. And so that is over here saying, Thomas Doe, I'm a part of BCG. And so over here, the next point is, so this is the BCG meeting. What's the agenda? And so Thomas just hands her a piece of paper. Can anyone tell me why just handing a piece of paper could potentially,
I think you should explain what the piece of paper is, like
Yes.
what's on it.
Exactly. Spot on. Thanks, Andrew. But one thing is that a lot of times, especially when you have a dense piece of paper, the chances are Jane is probably going to be like, okay, now what is this? So it's important to explain or at least give a little bit of context prior to handing them a piece of paper, like saying, hey, we're going to be going over X, Y, Z. And if you want details, they're on this piece of paper instead of directly just handing it.
Naveen, I have a quick question regarding video calls. Is it okay to if you're not like presenting and you're just sitting idle, is it okay to like have a drink of something, or is that considered rude?
No, I think everyone understands that, as long as you're not holding like a wine glass,
It's tea.
Yeah, that's perfectly okay. So if you're ever feeling like you need to take a sip of water, maybe not eating. Eating is probably not appropriate within a particular situation, unless if like everyone's eating or something like that. In that case, that's fine. But yeah, really good question.
Thank you.
Okay, so now Jane says, okay, let's get started. And Thomas says, okay. Bet is also not a very professional term. A lot of people outside of our generation do not know what bet means. And chances are a lot of people are going to be interacting with professionally are not going to be our generation. So, and then Jane says, okay, I think I'm interested. What are the next steps? And then Tom replies, yeah, just text me at whatever number and we can set everything up. So can anyone tell me why that would not be?
He's very general about setting everything up.
Yeah, that is correct. So there's no detail regarding setting everything up. And especially when you're meeting a client, you probably don't want to just use a phone number. You probably want some form of professional communication. So you probably want to say, okay, please email me at this, or even better, provide me with your email and I can send you the next steps instead of, asking the client to do it. Because, the whole point of a client hiring a consultant is to get help with doing work. So you don't want to start by saying, okay, email me, saying, hey, can I have your email? And then I can send you the details. And so Jane asks, do you have a business card? And Tom says no. He asks for a pen and then writes his name, phone number, and email on a piece of paper. And so this is just, be prepared. If you're going to go to an in-person meeting, at least have some form of a way so you can give, like, it doesn't need to be a business card necessarily, but it could be something, yeah, like, and, take a pen if you're going to a business meeting because Tom asks for a pen. And then this is the last bullet point is, okay, and what are your next plans for this project? And Tom does not have any clue. So that's also something, is always be prepared for the next step. You always have to be one step ahead of the game. So it's important to make sure that you actually plan out what the next steps are going to be. And you have to plan out for both circumstances. Okay, if the client doesn't want to go our way, what do we do? If the client does want to go our way, what do we do? And if the client wants help regarding, if it's somewhere in the middle, then what do we do? So you need to plan out all those steps. Okay. And that brings me to our next topic, and I think it's one of our final ones, which is client communication. So these are a couple do's for when you're communicating with a client. Always send notes and questions in an email after the meeting. Send an Outlook invitation with the meeting time, so that's a calendar invite. Send a weekly agenda prior to the meeting. So before you meet with your client, be sure to actually tell them what you're going to be meeting about, unless if it's the same thing every week. Then turn on your camera and dress appropriately. Again, I think depending on I know, for example, the project I had last semester, everyone had their cameras off. So the first couple of meetings I had my camera on, and then I realized that everyone had their camera off. So I also started turning my cameras off. However, I'd always make sure to share my screen with whatever I was showing, just so they'd have context regarding what's going on. And be sure to CC the lead consultants, the team leads, and the director of project excellence. You don't have to necessarily CC them all the time, but whenever they're necessary, do feel free to include other people within the conversation. And so don't attach confidential information within an email. Chances are they'll probably ask you to do it in another format, or they might just ask you to upload it to a particular folder that they'll access. Don't use incorrect grammar or punctuation. This just brings me back to the, you take time to read your emails. Don't CC the entire team unless it's necessary, because chances are, they don't want to be replying to a list of 30 people, or even worse, 60 people, the entire BCG, for every single email. And then don't show up late to meetings or not show up at all. That's definitely, and if you are going to be showing up late or not showing up at all, please make sure to communicate that to your client beforehand. It's important for the clients to know who they're going to be meeting with and what they're going to be talking about. And please don't state unrealistic deadlines. Be honest, it's okay if you can't meet a particular deadline during a particular date. It's important that you're aware of your, what your team's current speed is, and be sure to discuss deadlines with your team or your lead consultants before actually stating them to your client. And so this is just a quick slide. There's not a lot of content on it, but it's basically just saying balancing professional and casual conversation. So the situation on the left is a lot more casual, so just a party, and the situation on the right is a lot more professional. I just noticed Lisa Simpson's there. Whoops. Okay, but a lot of the time, it's better to behave professional in a casual setting than casual in a professional setting, because a lot of the time, you will develop a personal relationship with your coworkers over the course of time. However, it is important to ensure when to be casual. For example, if you're going out with your coworkers for happy hour or whatever, that's fine to be casual during that situation. However, if you're in a meeting and the CEO of whatever company you're working for is over there, you can't just say, yo, what's up, dog, to your coworker who's sitting right next to you. If the CEO happens to over there, they're going to be like, what are my employees doing, And so this is just a summary slide. Professional communications needed to thrive in the workplace. Remember the do's and don'ts. balance professional and casual conversation based on the situation. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. This is my Purdue email. This is my Gmail. I check both of them very frequently. And on the summer Slack, my name is Naveen, but if you type Naveen Vivek, I'll show up as well. And same with the main Slack. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me now. And over here is a list of resources that you can take a look at. It's just a couple links that I referred to while I was making this presentation, some things that I think will be really useful.
I have a question about in-person communication when you're first meeting someone. Should you like address the person at the beginning if you know their name, or is that something you should just let them introduce themselves?
If you're interacting with them first time, probably let them introduce themselves, unless
Okay.
there's someone who is reporting to you. Because, you know, if someone is reporting to you, then, you know, just to break the ice a little bit, you can say, you know, hey, Andrew, how are you doing today? Like, for example, let's say you're an intern and I'm your intern manager. Sometimes it's a little easier for me to break the ice instead of you to break the ice because you might feel a little intimidated, which does make sense. However, if it's someone that, you know, who's, you know, at the same level of you or someone else, you should probably let them introduce themselves.
Okay.
Unless you've been in contact with them through email for a long time, in which case I don't really know how that'll work, but probably better to let them introduce themselves. Chances are they will, just because, you know, when you start a conversation with someone.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
So due to COVID, people feel uncomfortable giving handshakes. So how would you go about greeting them? Like you said, just waving at them, or?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I did not think about that when I was making this presentation. So I don't know how to wave like, at all. Like, I always wave really weirdly. I either do this or I do this, but I think maybe just probably not a nod up. That's not. I don't really know how I would. Does anyone else have an answer to that question? How would you address someone without giving a handshake? As
You could do
You
an
could
elbow
do
tap.
like you could do an elbow tap, or you could like just do like like you nod your head down like
that's what I was
lean
thinking. I was thinking
forward.
you nod your head down. That
Like,
would like
nice
a little
to
bit
meet
more
you.
formal. Yeah, like pleasure to meet you. That's probably the best thing. That's probably what I'd go to.
Because
Or
oh sorry. I was saying with the elbow thing, like it might be a little awkward when you first meet someone, unless it's like already established that you are gonna tap elbows.
Yeah.
But I get that's more sanitary. So
Something you could also purposely do. You'll like go for a handshake, but he says like, "Oh, wait, you can't."
I guess that's also a good point. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, you want to give a handshake, but due to circumstances, you can't. So I guess that gets the same message across. That's also a good one.
I think also just smiling at them is like a fine greeting as well.
Thank you. All those were great.
Yeah. Anyone have any other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
So if you follow up with someone and then they email you back telling you that like they'll let you know when they'll set up a meeting, but it's been like a while, is it okay to follow up again? And how long should you wait?
So it really depends on when the first email was sent out. So I definitely ran into the situation where it took a long time for me to hear back from an internship that I had applied for, and I was like told that it would take like 3 days, but it'd been like 2 weeks. And so looking back, I realized I might have waited a little too long. And especially if it's a pressing matter, like for example, if your deadline's approaching in a couple weeks and you know they haven't given you the information you need, it definitely is okay to follow up again and just say, or you could potentially start off with, hey, sorry to bother you, just wanted to double check if my email went through or something like that, and just wanted to check if there's any update on the situation. That's something that I do. I always say, hello, I was just wondering if there was any update on the situation. That's sort of, you know, it's not very like, it's not, you're not necessarily saying, hey, you guys are slow, you know, that's not the message you're trying to get across, but at the same time it kind of does imply that you are waiting on that information. Or you can say something like, hey, is there any update on the situation? My team is currently waiting on that particular thing in order to continue with their next task, which is XYZ. And so that way they sort of know a little bit that the team's holding off because of that lack of information or that lack of communication. And so maybe that will change things. But usually I try to say however long they've mentioned, maybe 1.5 times that. So like if it's 4 days and it's been 6 days, and you can email them. So 50% more. but that's just what I do. I usually double it, but looking back, doubling might be a little too long, especially if it's a pressing matter.